And hi everybody, welcome back to Fresh Outlook. We've been discussing the inauguration of Barack Obama. We're changing gears in a moment. We're going to talk about the latest strike by New York City school bus drivers. But before we show you a little bit of background information on that, I just want to introduce our panel for this week. Let's start with James. Tell us who you are, where are you from, and what are you doing here?
I'm James Peterson. I'm Director of Africana Studies at Lehigh University and a contributor to thegrio.com. And I'm here to talk about whatever everyone else is talking about.
Thank you. Remember, we're talking about what you're talking about. Jackie, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm talking about whatever James wants to talk about.
Great.
No, I'm Jackie Guzda, and I'm the media analyst for Ebru Today.
Now we're talking. And Susan?
I'm Sue Schurman. I'm Dean of the School of Management and Labor Relations at
I've never
Rutgers,
gone
the
into the
State
city
University
for them,
of
but
New
I've
Jersey.
gone to remote
Terrific. All right, we'll get the conversation started in just a moment, but first some background. The strike of New York City school bus drivers and matrons, has entered into its third week with about 150 students affected, The last strike was back in 1979. That lasted an excruciating 14 weeks. Take a look.
Children and parents are caught in the middle of a contract dispute between New York City and Local 1181 of the Amalgamated Transit Union.
They want to put people for less money.
Here's what the dispute is about. The city doesn't hire drivers and matrons directly. They work for private companies that have contracts. To cut costs, the city put its contracts with those private bus companies up for bid. Drivers worry when those new contracts begin, they will lose their jobs to cheaper alternatives, and they're now demanding job protections. But the city says those job protections would be illegal, a claim Local 1181 denies.
Then you get more inexperienced driver. This becomes a temporary job. They don't never get a pension. They don't get good benefits, so it's not attractive to experienced drivers.
Jose Santiago, who's been a driver for 11 years, says there are other ways the city can save money.
We have children, we have families. We need the medical plans. We need to stay in our jobs.
152,000 kids are affected, 14% of them being special needs. Just one day into the strike, school attendance is down 1% overall, and as much as 25% among the special education population.
You're not saving money, you're creating chaos.
New York City has provisions in place to help get kids to school. Free Metro cards are being offered to children and parents, and the city will reimburse parents who drive or send their kids in taxis. But working moms and dads say not only are these options a hassle, but safety is a concern. Some parents don't feel comfortable having their children ride public transit alone.
We hope that everything gets solved as soon as possible for the sake of the children and the parents.
I mean, yeah, let's get into this. A lot to get to, panel. This really just comes down to two sides. Bottom line, city budget constraints and people who want to keep their jobs, looking for job security, people who have worked really hard and say they've earned it. Now, Susan, you're a former bus driver. So I am dying to hear your take on this. Do you have a side, and if so, which one?
Well, I don't have a side, but because I'm not only a former bus driver, I'm a former dispatcher, training director, president of the local union for a while, and HR director for the transit authority for a while.
Wow, so you're the woman to have on this panel.
I've seen it from all sides.
Okay, well, what do you think? What's your reaction to this? Do you think they both sides have valid points, and what do you think is going to happen? What's to be expected here?
Both sides have valid points in the sense that the city clearly has a financial problem, and drivers clearly want to have job security long term. And somehow or other, you got to reconcile those two.
Okay.
But the problem we've got here is it's at least 30 years in the making, and it's not going to get solved overnight. So my thinking on this right now is that they're scheduled to meet on Monday, I think, and I believe they've got a federal mediator coming in because the companies they work for are private companies.
Right.
And so it comes under private labor relations law.
Right.
So they ought to get in there with the mediator, and they ought to come to a resolution.
Right.
And then as soon as that's done, the union and the city and the companies need to sit down and rethink how transit is being delivered to New York City school kids.
Right.
Because the way it is right now, it's not sustainable.
No, it's not sustainable, and it's finally coming to a head. But Basically, the school bus drivers, they want employee protection programs.
Right.
I mean, that's
Right.
really what this, right, EPPs. One is quoted as saying, we undergo background checks. It's not like some of the people that might ultimately get, be replacing them. We're fingerprinted. We're tested regularly for alcohol and drugs. We're trained in CPR. The safety of the children is of the utmost responsibility. You bring in these lower cost bus companies, they're not going to be checked the way we are, and you're putting school children at risk. So what's more important, money or the safety of kids? I mean, that's their point, James.
Well, Dean Schurman is right that this is a problem that's been brewing over a long period of time. And, I'm generally speaking in favor of organized labor, and generally speaking very, very skeptical of the ways in which governments, municipal, state, and federal have tried to weaken certain organized labor positions. But I'm also a big proponent of education, and all I can think about are those special needs kids who are not getting into schools on a regular basis. And also I'm thinking about the larger problem that this city has in terms of funding education, and not just transportation to the schools itself, but actual education itself. And so sadly, I think there is going to have to be a reorganization of this part of it. We've got to figure out more economic ways to...
Do you have any solutions?
Yeah, I think ultimately for this particular situation, they need to resolve this one, but they are going to have to come up with what's the most economically efficient way to get kids to and from schools, and it may not be the ways that, it may not go the way that organized labor wants it to go.
Well, the city's saying there is an economically efficient way to do it. We have to new bids that'll cost less money.
It may ultimately have to have a little bit of that, because again, we have to think really critically about all the different costs of education so that we can start to deliver education in a much more effective and efficient way. I mean, and that goes from everything from teachers to bus drivers.
Well, let's just get some of the numbers. New York City officials claim the city's paying $6,900 annually per child for busing, compared with about $3,100 in Los Angeles. So these bids are saving the controversy. It's going to save the city money.
Well, let's look at that.
Okay, let's look. Okay,
so $7,000 a year times 150,000 students.
Right.
Well over $1 billion. 8,000 school bus drivers and matrons making 35,000. Do the math. So labor costs is less than half of the total price the city is paying for this transit service. Now let's add in the price of diesel fuel.
Okay.
Okay, and I don't know what that is. I haven't seen the total package. But the question I think that needs to be asked is the city really saving money by this private contractual arrangement? The experience over the country over the last 30 years is that generally privatization of public service doesn't turn out to save nearly as much, because private companies are private for a reason. They want to make a profit.
That's right.
So nobody's discussed that, and I'd like to know what the answer is.
Okay. You should run for office.
Well, no, thank you. But the other point that I've been thinking a lot about, I've spent all of my career really based on the idea that in the public sector, and probably the private sector, unions and workers and the employers should come together, and they should find the best solutions for the people they serve.
Yes.
And our labor relations system doesn't really promote that.
That's right.
Our labor relations system in the United States is really based on the idea of conflict of interest and collective bargaining kind of come together as adversarial.
Go ahead.
So just to finish, so that a lot of private sector corporations now are beginning to say what I think is obvious, which is that you, in the long run, can't cut your way to a profit. And we've just about exhausted that strategy in the United States. You can only drive at all levels. You can only drive wages down so far.
Right.
And if you look at, you want a decent job for people that are going to carry your kids.
That's right.
Right.
You want that, and the evidence is
you get what you pay for. In my opinion.
What you pay for.
And the LA comparison is a terrible comparison, because
Exactly.
driving in New York is
that wasn't my comparison.
That's a terrible comparison, because driving in New York City is a completely different job than driving Los Angeles. You have to have different skill set, different knowledge of like cartography and the mapping of the city. That's a terrible.
And look, I drove a bus and taught people how to drive buses in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Right.
Okay, and it was an incredibly complex, and we did a lot of the school bus operation. So I know what it's like to carry these kids, and particularly special needs kids. It was an incredibly complex thing in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I can't imagine.
No, I know.
New York City.
It is, yeah.
Well,
They should be the highest paid school bus
They
drivers.
should. I do want to segue, though.
Yes.
We don't have a lot of time. I do want to talk about the future of unions in this country. You know, is this another example of them getting crushed? And how do we save the union? Should we be saving the unions?
You know, unions are the way in a market economy. Unions are the way in which workers have some kind of power that counterbalances essentially corporate power.
There you go.
That's why we have the National Labor Relations Act. And when unions disappear, workers' bargaining power disappears, and you get what we've got right now, which is a disproportionate share of national wealth going to the very top.
That's right.
Right.
So you're not going to restore the middle class without unions and workers' right to organize.
This strike is just about job guarantees that the union can't have.
But
Should a union have a job
there's
guarantee?
another piece of this, it seems to me, that we ought to focus on, and that is, it's my very strong view that people ought to get a decent job.
Yep.
If I work hard for 40 hours a week or more, I ought to be able to make enough money
To live.
and if I'm going to carry New York City's children, and
So it sounds like you support the EPPs.
well, I absolutely. My dad,
Okay. I
my
knew
father was a teacher. No, but that is going to turn out to be one of the most complex labor relations legal issues.
Yeah.
Because who's the employer here really?
Right,
If
right.
the city's controlling that, then these private contractors are really joint employers.
Jackie, what do you think?
No, you know, we were talking before in the green room, and this is what we were saying is I live in New York City, but I live in one of the outer boroughs. You know, one of the less attractive outer boroughs. You know, you live in Manhattan. These people the drivers make $14 an hour. The matrons make 11. I couldn't live on
Right,
that
where do they live?
Who can?
Right.
out in the boroughs.
So where do they live?
Right.
How
Next
do
door
they
to
get
me.
to where they have to get to?
Right.
Yeah.
But the other thing, it seems to me, we have to decide as a country is, you know, what kind of, you know,
What
are
kind
we
of
going to
country do we
provide
wanna
decent
be?
jobs?
Yep.
How far can you push wages down?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And expect that we're going to have a quality of life for
Well,
anybody.
The union says that Mayor Bloomberg can call for this clause if he wants to. He can enact this clause. He can do that. And
Well, we're
the
not
city
gonna
is saying,
find-
no, we can't. It's been ruled unconstitutional. And I don't agree. It was unconstitutional in that particular case, not for every case. What do you
Right.
think, Jackie?
And we're not going to find out.
Well, we'll see what happens, won't we? I mean, they've got to bring this to the table.
Well, but you know, they've got an unfair labor practice in front of the National Labor Relations Board. In the D.C. Circuit of the federal courts just ruled that Obama didn't have the right to appoint the three people on the
right.
labor board. We are now in a national labor relations vacuum. We have nobody making rulings
Those
on
are
these
three
Right.
Bush-appointed judges, by the way.
Thank you,
And
thank
if
you.
you talk about, you talk about the war against organized labor. That's part of the war against organized
Yeah.
labor. And you're right, also, Dina. As a nation, we've got to make a decision. What kind of nation are we going to be?
Well,
Do we want people to have a living wage? People who work hard? People who serve our community? Do we want them to be able to afford to pay for their families or
Right.
not?
Yeah, James,
Let's-
isn't that
real-
what the
last
inaugural?
word,
Yeah,
Jackie,
isn't
then
that
we
what
gotta
the
go.
inaugural lesson was all about? Be the people.
We the people.
Okay.
Yep.
I don't know about that, but we got to go to break and change gears. When we come back on Fresh Outlook, we're going to be talking scandal, finally, from Lance Armstrong to Monte Teo. We'll get into the truth, lies, and confessions from public figures. That's next on Fresh Outlook.